Hello, welcome to another one of my videos where I take a movie that doesn't work and try to make it work a little better. Today is the long-awaited fix for the 2013 film Man of Steel. Let's just get into it. This movie is a mess. There's a lot of problems here, but I don't want to be misunderstood. This isn't a bad movie. There's some very interesting stuff here and a few scenes that I really like. So much so that it makes me think that someone else wrote or directed those parts of the movie. But the stuff that doesn't work really outweighs the stuff that does by a lot. Now, more or less on the whole, the plot of this movie is fine. Just describing the general events of the movie. Clark is a nomad who doesn't know what he wants in life. He finds his origins, aliens come, he fights them. The broad strokes don't need fixing. It's the smaller stuff like character motivations for certain characters and some of the excesses that a director who worked on this movie indulged in, stuff like that needs to be fixed. So if you've seen the movie, just picture the movie that we got with the following changes. One thing that was kind of off-putting to me on this most recent viewing of the movie was the pacing. I said something very similar about Superman Returns, but the pacing goes from very slow to breakneck, no pun intended, speed. Yes, technically there is a Krypton scene with lots of explosions, gunfire, punching, and dragon riding, but I usually tend to tune out whenever we get a Krypton scene because we've seen it all before. And I know we kinda need these scenes to explain the MacGuffin of the movie, but since this movie is already jumping back and forth between the present day and flashbacks during the first half, why not just skip all of the Krypton stuff and jump right into Clark working at an oil refinery or something like that. Then later in the movie, someone else can give us a succinct flashback scene to the death of Krypton. I know that cuts like all of the action stuff in the first half of the movie, but I'm trying to find easy ways to homogenize the tone throughout this movie. I like the personal introspective tone of Clark feeling like an outsider and looking for his purpose in life. I'll get to more of that in a second, but other people probably like the last half hour that was nothing but explosions and punching and neck breaking. But I wish you could find a way to bring some of that frenetic pacing into the first half of the movie and bring some of the thought-provoking stuff into the second half. And I think maybe you could find a way to do that. Now, I would either reduce, consolidate, or just shorten all of the flashback scenes. They all exist to tell us that Clark feels like he doesn't belong on this world, which is thematically very important in this movie. Even though the first half doesn't have a whole lot of plot stuff concerning the alien invasion and terraforming and stuff like that, the first half is where almost all of our themes for the movie are, so it is very important stuff. But maybe you could have like 2 flashback scenes. You don't need the scene where Martha tells Clark how to focus his powers if you're going to have adult Clark later on mention this very scene to Zod. Personally, I would change the scene where Clark saves the school bus. Before the movie even came out, a lot of people, myself included, hated that Jonathan Kent is effectively telling Clark that he should have let his classmates die when that bus went into the river. While there is precedent for the Kents not wanting Clark to use his powers, Jonathan Kent comes off looking really awful when he tells Clark that he should have let his classmates die, even if he understandably thinks that the government is going to come and take Clark away if they find out the truth about him. I mean, the FBI arrests Lois Lane because they think she might know who Superman is, so Jonathan Kent isn't wrong, but still, he should be the kind of guy telling Clark that there is a lot of bad in the world, which is why it's that much more important for him to be the good that people can look up to. He just needs to be a little bit more careful. This is made even more bizarre when Jonathan Kent later dies trying to save a dog. Now, I love dogs, but Jonathan Kent sacrificing his life for the dog here seems kind of silly to me. I'm sure some people out there value animals more than humans, but if you're already toying with Clark unsure about what he wants to do with his life, then you should have Jonathan die saving some people from the tornado. This can inspire Clark to spend his own life saving people from now on. Now, if you watch my fix video for the 1978 Superman movie, you know that I prefer Clark getting all of his wholesome goodness from his Earth upbringing. I don't like Clark getting messages about his destiny from his dead space dad, which this movie does give us. But the entire movie is about Clark trying to decide which half of his heritage is more important to him. Now, if it had been me, on day one when there weren't any plot elements on the board yet, I would have gone in a different direction. But working with what we have here, thematically, this movie is very strong. We've never really seen Clark struggle this much with his alien roots like this, at least in the movies. There were a couple of scenes in previous movies where Clark felt like an outsider, but those were generally swept under the rug pretty quickly. The first Christopher Reeve movie, in the scene where he kicks the football, that's pretty much this whole movie. Now, this would be where I would want to change the somber attitude of this whole film. A lot of people think that Superman should always be happy-go-lucky and positive with a big smile on his face, but I just have problems reconciling that with the guy with super hearing who can always hear all of the horrible stuff that's going on in the world. Calling back to what I would do differently with the Jonathan Kent pep talk a little bit. He tells Clark that the world is horrible, which is why it's important for him to be good. So I don't mind Superman sometimes having a sad, pensive side to him, but I would want him to be a little more upbeat than what he is in this movie. Again, maybe that's kind of conflicting with his journey to deciding if his humanity is more important than his kryptonity, which is a very moody kind of self-discovery. But picture this. Beginning of the movie, Clark goes to the oil refinery, saves those dudes, and he's smiling and says, "Don't worry, I've got you." And then one of them screams. They're scared of him. Clark struggles to do what his dad taught him, but it's hard when everyone on the planet seems to fear him. And this might be something that you could deal with in later movies also hint hint. So if sad, broody Heathcliff Superman is a 1 and happy-go-lucky smiles all the time Superman is a 10, I would want the Superman of this movie to lean closer to a 10, but he doesn't have to be a 10 all the time. He can be somewhere around a 7 if that makes sense. Oh boy, this thing's gonna be long. Okay, so Clark messing up the hillbilly bully, that guy's truck is just bullying. Yes, the dude deserved it, but Clark wasn't doing this to avenge the waitress's honor. He was doing it to get even because the dude threw beer in his face. Superman used to be more aggressive in his pursuit of justice, taking a dude who sold weapons and throwing him on the front lines of battle, that kind of thing, but that's not what this is. This is just petty. So, much like the movie that we got, Clark finds out about this alien ship in the South Pole, he sneaks there, and the biggest thing I would change about this movie is adding another character at this point. Does anyone remember after this movie came out, one of the pods at the scout ship at the South Pole, it was already open, and so a lot of people were theorizing that Supergirl already existed in this world. Ha ha ha, how naive we all were, thinking that these people were capable of thinking that far ahead when making these movies. But anyway, because the first half of the movie kind of drags a little bit, and yes, that's got some of my favorite bits thematically, but it is still a little bit slow when you're watching it, I would throw in the character of Karsta War-Ul. Who? Who is that? She's loosely based on a character from the 1970s, Superwoman, but this version, she was introduced in the mid-2000s as a Kryptonian who had left Krypton a long time ago and was hiding out on Earth. Not doing any superhero stuff, just living the life of a hermit. And I would say instead of this scout ship being thousands of years old, it's Karsta War-Ul's ship and it's just a few decades old. Why am I introducing this character? Since I'm getting rid of the Krypton flashback at the beginning of the movie, I figure this character can give some of the exposition about where Clark came from. So instead of Clark having this special key and he inserts it in the scout ship and that is what alerts Zod and his crew to come to Earth, we're going to play things a little differently. For one, I think it's really dumb that Jor-El left his key for his son but didn't leave him any way of looking at the information on the key. How does Jor-El know that Clark will find the scout ship? You might could say that Jor-El is mostly concerned with the survival of his son, but if that's the case, why leave the key with him in the first place? I mean, when I send my son in a spaceship to another world and I put a DVD in his crib, I'm going to make sure that I also put a DVD player in there so that he can use the DVD. I don't want to just hope that he can find the DVD player that is thousands of miles from where his ship lands on this other planet. But the reason this movie does this is that we need something to bring Zod to Earth, so it has to be Clark putting the key in the scout ship, and that's why Clark doesn't have anything to put the key into on his own ship, because if he did that when he was 13, when he got the key, then Zod would have come to Earth then. So I get why they did this from a plot perspective, but it makes Jor-El look incredibly dumb. Also, since we're talking about Zod real quick, I want to change just about everything about him. What is the point of putting Zod and his followers in the Phantom Zone if they are just going to be released in like 2 minutes after Krypton explodes? I know it's so that they can survive the destruction of Krypton, but why are they released? If General Zod is the same age as Michael Shannon was when this movie came out, he would have been 39 during the fall of Krypton, which seems like a safe bet. He doesn't look much younger than that. And at one point in the movie, Clark says that he's 33, so that puts Zod at being in his early 70s during the main events of the movie. I don't care if you do have the powers of a god, there is no way that dude is 72, and there's no way a 72-year-old would be able to kick around trying to destroy an entire civilization. I wasn't the biggest fan of Superman 2, but you know what worked? Putting Zod in the Phantom Zone and saying that he didn't age in the intervening 30-something years until he was released. And there's a pretty easy way that this movie could have done the same thing. Instead of Clark having this magic key that does everything the plot needs it to at different points in the movie, let's just say that when Clark goes to the South Pole, he touches the alien ship, and his Kryptonian DNA kind of jumpstarts it. Maybe it sends out a signal to any other Kryptonians. And instead of Clark having a chat with his ghost dad, he will meet up with Karsta War-Ul. She'll be pretty mad that he activated the ship because for plot reasons, the signal that the ship sent is going to release Zod and his pals from the Phantom Zone, which they have been in this entire time. You can fill in the blanks about why the ship would do this. Maybe it's programmed to seek out Kryptonian life forms after it's been deactivated for a time, and since it only found 2 in the entire corporeal universe, then it figures it needs to get some others out of cold storage. I don't know. If you don't like that, well, it works better than Zod being in his 70s kicking Superman's butt. So in the comics, I don't know exactly how long Karsta War-Ul had been hanging out away from Krypton when it exploded, but here I'm going to say that she was a peer of Zod and Jor-El. Jor-El is a maverick who is willing to make babies the old-fashioned way, so even though most Kryptonians wouldn't dream of leaving their planet to seek out other worlds, Karsta and Jor know that Krypton is doomed, so she leaves, I don't know, maybe a year before Krypton explodes, and she could be in her early 20s when Krypton explodes, and then be in her mid-50s during the movie. So imagine Helen Mirren, but like 20 years ago. And you can either say that Zod was imprisoned prison before she snuck away to look for a new home for her people, or he was in prison after she left and she found out about it in a space email or something like that. So not only does Karsta War-Ol give Clark some backstory on Krypton and who Jor-El was and who General Zod was, but she can also provide some kinda sorta action scenes that are lacking at this point in the movie. She tells Clark about Zod and says that his ship is coming out of the Phantom Zone and will be at Earth within a day. She says she can hold her own, but she can't fight his army by herself. So we get a quick training montage, kinda like what Bruce Wayne went through with Ducard in Batman Begins. And if you have to, since we got rid of a few of those flashbacks the movie gave us earlier, you can have Clark talk about how he has always felt like an outsider, and he asks how Karsta deals with it. And her answer is that she never tried integrating with humanity, and the only reason she is interacting with Clark is because he activated the ship. From here, the movie more or less goes on the way that it did. Lois exposes that there's an alien on the planet who saved her life, but we don't get the scene where Clark explains why he has kept a low profile, because he's busy training with Karsta, and the movie more or less happens the same way if you remove that conversation between Lois and Clark. Zod and his minions make their message saying that they want Kal-El, Lois gets arrested, and so Clark goes to rescue her and turn himself into the government. Karsta tells him this is a waste of time, Zod is not interested in peaceful parley, he is very dangerous, he will kill you and everyone on this planet. But being raised among humans, Clark can't turn his back on them, so he has to play into Zod's hands if it means he can maybe help the people of Earth that he has endangered with his actions. This will be where Clark gets the costume. We can say that it's some kind of Kryptonian uniform for space exploration or something like that, and Karsta puts the symbol of the House of El on it. Then Clark and Lois have their first real conversation. She says that she's sorry for outing him like that. She can see now why he wanted to keep a low profile. Superman turns himself in, and I don't have Zod wanting Lois to come with him because why would he want her on the ship? The only reason the movie does that is so that Jor-El can pass crucial information to Lois, and so that the movie doesn't lose track of her during this chunk of the movie. But as far as character motivations go, Zod has absolutely no reason to want Lois on the ship. Now this is where I need to rework Zod's character motivation. On paper, as a villain, Zod sounds fine. He believes in saving Krypton even if it means doing very bad things. Fine, I can get behind a villain with a vision who isn't just evil because the story needs a bad guy. But the problem is that most of what Zod says or does not make any sense. The only reason that he comes into conflict with Jor-El in the first place is because Zod wants to take the MacGuffin that controls what kind of babies are born, and he wants to decide what kind of babies will be born. He specifically indicates that the families of the Council who have allowed Krypton to die will not continue. But why? Just because these old folks made some bad decisions doesn't mean that their kids would, right? Even in a weird society where a robot decides what kind of baby will be born and what its career will be, that still doesn't determine the actions the baby would make in adulthood, would it? The only reason this is here is so that Zod will have a reason to come to Earth and come into conflict with Superman later in the movie. And then when he does finally come to Earth, he wants the Codex that Jor-El somehow magically encoded into Kal-El's DNA. Zod says that when he gets it, he will annihilate everyone on Earth. Why? Why not take the Codex and go to Mars and rebuild Krypton there? You have terraforming machines. We see them later in the movie. Seems like you and Kal would have absolutely zero reason to fight if you did that, and the movie would be over much quicker. Or for that matter, once you find out that you guys have superpowers on this world, why terraform at all? Zod says something about how terraforming will prevent years of painfully getting used to this world's atmosphere like Clark did. But it takes Zod just a few minutes to be perfectly acclimated, and almost all of his followers are soldiers, so they should all be big and tough like he is. Now, I get it, movies are built on conflict, and if the movie actually did have Zod peacefully take the Codex and go to an abandoned world, that would be a really boring movie. But then the movie needs to find a good reason why Zod needs to stay and fight Superman on Earth. But it feels like Snyder and Goyer were just thinking about all the cool action scenes that they would get in the second half of the movie, and not thinking so much about how the story would arrive at those action scenes in a natural way. And I know I'm not the first person to say something like this about Zack Snyder, but someone needs to tell him that just because you put half an hour of explosions and punching on the screen does not make the movie more exciting. I honestly considered just skipping the last half hour of this viewing because I knew nothing of consequence would happen until Superman breaks Zod's neck. I'm not saying there's nothing to care about in this movie. This movie actually does a good job establishing Clark in the first half and his journey of self-discovery. Again, maybe he should be a little less mellow about it, but it's still solid stuff. But you look at a movie like Spider-Man Homecoming. You care about Peter succeeding, but there's a small part of you that also cares about the Vulture succeeding. He just wants to provide for his family, and you hate to see him fail, or at least I do. This movie tries to paint Zod as a patriot, but everything he does is needlessly violent and stupid. So let's say that when Zod's ship is released from the Phantom Zone, they immediately head towards Earth, and when Zod sends a message to Earth, Hotshot Military Man here orders his guys to fire on that ship. Nobody makes demands of us, we'll show him, and since none of them have been exposed to yellow sunlight yet, this would be bad for the Kryptonians on board. So the ship ends up crashing to Earth, several of the Kryptonians die, and more importantly, the ship is now damaged beyond repair. This would explain why Zod is so gung-ho about killing the people of Earth, because they killed some of the last last of his kind, and it explains why he can't just peacefully take the Codex to some unpopulated world because his ship is now destroyed. And you can still have Clark turn himself over to Zod like you got in the movie. Maybe Zod is putting up a charade about how he just wants to talk to one of his fellow survivors, and he's not mad about the humans shooting him down. But then when he talks to Clark, oh, you better believe I'm mad, I'm going to exterminate all of these guys. Are you with me? This is where Clark's character arc is fulfilled. He spent the whole movie trying to decide which is more important, his human upbringing or his Kryptonian roots. And he's seen the good and the bad of Krypton, with Karsta, who is a little brusque but is a good person, and Zod, who has gone full Captain Ahab and intends to take his quest to its most bloody end. It's here where Clark decides that he will make his stand with the people of Earth. This is where you get your big action pieces, but it doesn't drag on for 30 minutes straight like it did in the movie. You still get the scene where the military helps Superman reopen the Phantom Zone by combining the two Kryptonian ship engines together, and Karsta will come in all Han Solo-like just when it looks like Superman is going to lose. Superman will hesitate on pushing the button or something that will activate the black hole because Karsta is too close to ground zero, but she tells him to go ahead and do it to save his planet. Clark does it, and all of the Kryptonians, including Zod, are sucked in. Clark can still have his sad face because Karsta wasn't a bad guy, and she deserved better. Now, as far as Superman breaking Zod's neck, I actually didn't hate it as much as some people did. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. A lot of people would whine and whine about that like it was the only part of the movie that they saw. When I would ask people what Clark should have done differently, they never answered. Superman doesn't kill, and that's that. Okay, but you need to find a solution to that problem if you hate it so much. I did hear one person say that if you remove that scene entirely, as producer Chris Nolan wanted to do, then you remove the culmination of Superman's character arc. You know, the character arc is usually fulfilled with the character making some kind of choice, and here, the choice is to break Zod's neck to save a few humans too dumb to play limbo for their life. But I would argue the actual character arc that ties to all of the themes of the movie is concluded a good 10 minutes earlier in the movie when Superman sucks all of the Kryptonians back into the Phantom Zone. The last 10 minutes of fighting with Zod is just there because Zack Snyder loves action scenes. And I think Snyder just doesn't understand Superman. Maybe not even superheroes in general. He's talked about how if you think superheroes don't kill, then you're living in a dream world, which that's what this is. This is escapist entertainment. Sue me if I want to see a slightly brighter place than the actual world that I do live in. So I think the big reason Snyder wanted Superman to snap Zod's neck wasn't because it concludes Clark's character arc of the movie, but because Snyder thinks that Superman is too old school and he needs to be more edgy and modern. Back before the Watchmen movie came out, he said some pretty alarming stuff about what could happen to make a movie dark compared to the Nolan movies of Batman, which he said weren't that dark. And that very mindset illustrates to me that he was just the absolute worst choice to direct this movie. You've already got a much heavier movie with Clark spending most of the film agonizing about his place on this world and if he fits in. You don't have to have him commit a particularly violent murder to really illustrate that these movies are air quotes dark, which is not something that most people who were actually interested in seeing this movie even wanted. Yes, a lot of people complain about how Superman is too much of a Boy Scout, but those people aren't interested in seeing this movie, so don't pander to them. And that's almost everything that I would change about this movie. Oh, and I wouldn't have Lois and Clark kiss before the big action scene. They haven't earned that, they barely know each other. You can have them do the coy welcome to the planet bit at the end and hint at a relationship for the sequel, but these two have had an entire conversation at this point, and they don't need to be kissing just yet. And that's it. Like I said, the very bare bones of this movie required almost no changes. It's just some of the other elements that make the movie problematic. But I think with these changes, we would have had a much better movie. What do you guys think though? Like it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments below. And as far as the next movie I'll be fixing, it will be Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. I don't know how long it will take me to fix that one since it's pretty bad, but while you wait for that one, why don't you check out some of the other videos that I do on this channel? And until then, I'll see you later. Have a great rest of the day.